What is up, and welcome to Ride Potential. We got another day in the garage working on the 2002. As you may or may not have seen in one of the last ones working on it, while we were driving it, there's a pretty good driveline vibration. I think it's the drive shaft, and we're going to try to confirm that today. So first things first, jack up the car, and then I'm going to get underneath there, start feeling around, see if the drive shaft's loose. I think these cars have a Giubo too. Don't know. We're learning still. I've barely been underneath this car. Hopefully it's a drive shaft, and then I also need to check into the shifter. Let me show you. My shifter bushings are totally shot, and I think the shifter is actually brushing the drive shaft. If you force it to like shift too hard, and it comes up and down. I wasn't even show you. It moves up and down. If you force it one way or the other too far while you're moving, you hear it start hitting rotating parts. So that's a little sketchy. Anyway, so follow along. We're going to sort out a couple more issues with the 2002. So we've got the car up in the air, and before I even got to the vibration, I exposed another couple issues. We've sprung a coolant leak from one of these front hoses. I'm assuming it's one of these two because this mixing pipe was really corroded and nasty, and I doubt these, yeah, it's wet under there. So that's it. I'm gonna have to buy a new one of those because they were super corroded and nasty. A bunch of stuff built up on the housing, and those silicone hoses don't like conform as much as like a normal rubber hose. So we're leaking down there and on the ground. And then over here, I think this is oil residue, maybe, but you can see it all across the top here. And on the hood is where I noticed it first. But you may have noticed, I don't have a breather or whatever going on over there. I've got a catch can on the floor from another car that I'm gonna mount up to this, but just driving around town a little bit, I didn't bother doing it yet. Clearly, I should have because there's oil spraying everywhere. Anyway, more things, there's always something. So good news on the vibration. I think best case scenario happened. I'll get under there and show you in a second, but the joints of the drive shaft are solid, but the center support bearing is absolutely shot, and then the Giubo from the drive shaft to the output of the trans is shot too. So let me crawl under here and show you what we're working with. So here you can see first, glanced at the rubber bushing, Giubo, whatever you want to call it, and it's split at every bolt. And when I put it in gear and turn this, and you can see it flexing in there. So we'll go ahead and order a new one of these. And then I came to the center support bearing, which you can also see is absolutely trashed. And then I grabbed the drive shaft, and I'll show you how much play there is in there. However, if you look here, when I spin it, there is no play in this U-joint, which is good. And same thing at the back, there's another U-joint right before the diff. It's really hard to see. Yeah, you can't see it because the subframe's in the way. But trust me that one's good too. So that's, I think, best case scenario. I'll order a new center support bearing, drop this drive shaft out, and replace that center support bearing and the rear Giubo. And then, oh, let me also show you the shifter carrier. Excuse me. So the shifter carrier here is moving all over the place, and you can see right here there's witness marks on the drive shaft where this bracket has been hitting it. So I need to figure out what to do to tighten that up. A few days later update, we've got some parts. We've got a Giubo, a center support bearing, a new front belt that I needed, alternator bushings that we needed, and new brake lines, soft lines. So first things we're going to do is what we're working on in this episode is the drive shaft and the vibration. So we're gonna get under the car, pull the drive shaft out, and swap the new Giubo on and the new center support bearing. All right, we got the drive shaft out and on the floor. No real tips to get it out. There's 17 millimeters on the Giubo on the transmission side, nuts and bolts on both sides of the Giubo, and center support bearings, a 13 millimeter, 2 bolts to drop it right here, 2 bolts there, all the Giubo, and then the back has 4 17s as well. Nuts on one side, the other side are flat bolts that sit right here against this flange, so you only need to get it from this side. It's a little tricky, but you can see actually right here where the diff mount is, you can reach from the passenger side where the exhaust isn't and get a wrench up there, so it's not too bad. But we made the right call replacing it, because look at this. As I pulled the Giubo out, it fell to pieces. It is in 5 separate pieces now, so good call to replace it. Here's our fresh guy, and then the center support bearing, as you can see, like the retainer for the bearing is shot, and the actual drive shaft was just like bouncing around inside of that. So here we got a freshy here. So now we're gonna, I think, to pull this apart, gotta get this, I think it's a 22 millimeter out, and then this will separate the front and rear of the drive shaft, and we can put that new bearing in. So I'm gonna show you my method for trying to get this off. Got the drive shaft here. Turns out this is actually a 19 in here. I've marked it with a silver Sharpie so I can try to line it back up and maintain some balance. And then over here I've got 2 bolts through the end of the drive shaft and a pry bar that I'm going to be stepping on. And then I've got my 19 box end wrench, whatever, crow and wrench. And I've got that, and I'm going to be cranking on it as hard as I can. Might need a pipe on the end of this because that sucker is pretty tight. So see if we can get that sucker off. Well, I got it apart, as you saw, and I'm trying to get creative to knock the old bearing off. I don't have a puller in the garage, so I may run over to AutoZone and rent one. But we're going to see what we can do to get creative to do that before I have to make a trip down to the store. But in the end, that might save me some time, so we'll see what happens. So I don't know if whacking it with a hammer loosened it up, but I grabbed 2 big pry bars, and let me show you how I started pushing it down. Yeah, you can see this. So I held it like this between my legs, grabbed 2 pry bars, and just stuck them in the end here, and pried them down. And you can see, once I got like equal pressure on both sides, the bearing started to slide right off. So get a little bit more leverage in there. I need to stick something then in there so I can pry a little bit farther, but it's coming right off. So a little break from the drive shaft. I think I showed you my loose shifter mechanism, whatever. Let me show you what I figured out now that the drive shaft's out of the way. So this greasy pile of mess up here, you can see this whole thing is loose, and this bolt right here, well, I'm hoping it's not stripped out. I'm hoping I can just tighten that sucker up. Doesn't look like it's stripped. So we're going to tighten that back up, and then we're going to have ourselves a nice tight shifter up here. So we are sliding the new center support bearing onto the front half of the drive shaft, and had to get a little creative again. This is the only socket I had big enough to fit over the this spline center section. So, but it's not deep enough. As you see, it bottomed out on the splines before it hit the bearing. So what I did was I cut down the old bearing, put it on top of here, then used my socket, because I used the old bearing as a spacer, used my socket, tapped it with a dead blow, and it went right down. Now it's fully seated. So now we get to put this back together, and you can see my marks. Don't forget to line that sucker back up, and we'll bolt that back together. And pro tip under the car, when I already put the Giubo back on the back of the transmission, you'll notice this when pulling it out, but a reminder then, put the bolts that connect to the drive shaft in the Giubo before you put the Giubo onto the transmission, because you can't fit them in behind the transmission. So don't forget to do that, otherwise you'll have to pull it back apart or put all the bolts in one way, which I guess you could do that. All right, I've got a mess of tools on the ground, but the drive shaft's back in, the exhaust is all tight, and that's it. So I'll give it a little drive around the block clip later, and we'll confirm that the vibration is gone. And I know we got the shifter fixed, because I tightened that bolt up, it snugged right up, and now it won't be hitting the drive shaft, which is a very good thing. Anyway, stay tuned for more stuff. We got tons of stuff to do. More cooling stuff to sort out, because this started leaking again, so we're gonna fix this up. That was all corroded and nasty. We got brake lines to do, all the new soft brake lines throughout. What else we gotta do?
Drive it.
Drive the heck out of it. That is to come. So thanks for following along. Keep it rad. All right, check it out. We're driving and the vibration is fixed. We're just cruising, I don't know, 30 or so miles an hour. And it used to get bad as you coasted down to a stop. It would be pretty smooth cruising in 3rd or 4th gear as the drive shaft would spin pretty good. And right now, when you start to slow down to 10 or 20 miles an hour, it would get super rough. So as you can see, or maybe not really tell because it's just working as it should, but you can also see the shifter is nice and tight. Check out this shift. Doesn't slop around. It still needs a rebuild because it goes up and down out of the carrier, but it's working pretty good. So